three-dimensional, four-dimensional, 11-dimensional koan, a labyrinth, a puzzle, a kind of conundrum which has to be cut through. And it's all done in the mind. The whole apparent world is actually syntactical in nature. This is what they don't tell you in the philosophy departments or the physics departments, that the universe is made of words, and that there has to be a speaker and there has to be a hearer. Photons, quarks, anti-mu, that's not what it's about. That is a linguistic model that floats above the bedrock of syntactical connectedness that mind travels through to create networks that it interprets meaningfully. That's what's really going on. So, and I am not one to reach for, the metaphors of spirit with the connotation of moral opprobrium and all that, but there is a dimension which is accessible to each and every one of us that is so appallingly, titanically, and bizarrely different than the continuum that we're currently residing in, that it seems to throw doubt on the entire effort to understand the world as it's been carried out over the past 1,500 years. In other words, there is an object in this mental space which, as culture-creating creatures, we are attempting to colonize and invade this cultural space through the concrescence of language. In other words, through exteriorizing our ideas as tools, we are invading this cultural domain, this alternative reality, and the exploration by drugs, with psychedelic drugs, and then the pervasive problem with other sorts of drugs in the society. And it cuts very close to the core of ourselves as creatures. I mean, we are addictive animals. We addict to everything. We addict to each other and glorify it as our most noble outpouring of sentiment in the phenomenon of romantic love. I mean, when a pair of lovers are parted, the withdrawal symptoms are indistinguishable from heroin. I mean, vomiting, shaking, uncontrollable emotional outbursts, sleeplessness, short temper, hysteria. This is real. It is what romantic love is a pheromonal bonding, an exchange of chemical messengers which takes these two autonomous organisms and welds them into one galaxy of need and intention and understanding and expectation. Well, then you just tear that apart and people are, shook up. We addict to political ideals, all kinds. I mean, it's wonderful what's happening in Peking, but several decades ago, the same thing was happening in Berlin to a different beat. People find an idea and it works, and all barriers appear to be movable and all goals attainable. We invent money, which is kind of a multi-transformable drug. It stands for everything, everything you ever wanted, and you can addict to money. Nevertheless, what I will argue during this month is that this is not a bad thing, that we have a secret history that I will try to convince you of, and you should try to convince me that I'm wrong. And we will argue over the secret history of the human race and why it is, therefore, that we are as we are, and why it is that these psychedelics are not some peripheral issue of screwballs who can see God in a cabbage, but that, in fact, the issue of psychedelics is directly on the tracks of the onrushing locomotive of rationalist society, and that it ain't going to go away. Because what we're talking about here is a nude part of the human mind. What we're talking about here is something which takes its place in the great unfolding of the defining of human freedom that characterizes the entire adventure of global civilization. In other words, we've got the Pope under control. That happened in the Middle Ages. Slavery has now been generally embraced as a bad thing to be into, and we've gotten that on the books as a bad idea. Women have been suddenly recognized to be human beings, and so forth. So this swelling bubble of aha and perception of the real nature of the universe should also include the sudden realization that governments have no business telling people what foods and spices they should prefer. That this is an absurd role for government. And that, like slavery, like the subjugation of women, the legal persecution of dietary habits has just got to take its place with the high-button shoe. And we will talk a lot about the consequences of this. What does it mean? Because you see, what the government would have us believe, and perhaps believes itself, although I doubt it, is that we would return to the beast. That's all. We would just shoot junk and toot blow and flop around in ruinous orgies until hell froze over. And they, wiser, sterner, more disciplined than ourselves, represent the edifice of moral authority. This is a I'm doing it for your own good trip, see? But I want to return for a minute to the transcendental object, because that's the part which gets me off the most. It's taken me a long time to believe what was actually happening. I always said I could believe it if I read it in the newspaper, but I can't believe it because it's happening to me. And what we just have to do is to try and talk frankly based on the experience which each of us brings to this about, the thing. How much of it have you seen? Well, what do you think? How does it cast its shadow into your life? What is it? Because I talk on these subjects, I am a sort of a nexus point for information, and I gather stories. Science and rational philosophy and all that stuff is going on over here quite to its heart's content, while hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of people, exactly like ourselves, are logging in these experiences, which are, absolutely off the scale. People abducted by UFOs, people visited by Woodley Strieber's triangle face. That's not where I'm coming from. I mean, I have nothing but scorn for all weird ideas other than my own. And the reason I tolerate my own weird ideas is basically because of what I've gone through. I would never believe it if I hadn't seen it. There's a wonderful story, and I have no love for Christianity either, but I'll tell a Christian story. This is what I got out of the Gospels. Christ appeared several times in the upper room after the crucifixion to the apostles. The first time he appeared, the apostle Thomas was not there. And so then Thomas came after the visitation. And they said, the master was here. He was with us. And Thomas said, oh, shit. And they said, no, he was here. And he said, unless I put my hand into the wound, I will not believe it. So time passed, and Christ came again to the upper room, and Thomas was there among the other apostles, and Christ said, Thomas, come forward, put your hand into the wound. And he did. Now, the conclusion that I draw from this story is, alone of all human beings in human history, Thomas the doubter touched the incorporeal resurrected body of Christ. Only the doubter was allowed that privilege. And I just take that absolutely seriously. I think that God, or he, she, or it, loves the doubter and prepares treasures in paradise for the doubter that eclipse anything. And the method has worked for me, and I have seen absolutely astonishing things. I'm sure many of you have too. I have seen things where I had perfect confidence that no human being had ever laid eyes on these places before. And I'm sure you have too. Because that's how big it is in there. It is, the further in you go, the bigger it gets. We are like monkeys sitting in the presence of a flying saucer whose doorway has just been flung open. This is what we need to become conscious of. We need to dissolve the assumptions of the culture. And this is why LSD was so terrifying, because I firmly believe that one of the things psychedelics do is they dissolve cultural assumptions. It doesn't matter whether you're a member of the Politburo or a go-go dancer in Berlin or a professor of agronomy in Kansas, you will doubt your beliefs and your world if you take psychedelics. This is good. We need to dissolve our cultural conditioning. I'm convinced that reality is a tinker toy set that we can learn to take apart and put together in completely different ways. And we're going to have to pull some real rabbits out of the hat, or the planet is just going to pour over the edge into chaos. And before they were called psychedelics, they were called consciousness-expanding drugs. Well, if there's any possibility that that's true, let's put our best people on it, because consciousness is what we're dying for. We don't have enough of it. We can't feed the hungry. We can't manage a global economy. We can't hold down guerrilla warfare. We can't cure AIDS. We need to get smart. And if this stuff has anything to do with getting smart on any level, even for 1 in 1,000 of those who use it, pour it on. We can't stand around like a bunch of nitwits just watching the planet burn down around us. Now, it's very touchy, this whole thing, because it is literally and perhaps metaphorically as well illegal, forbidden territory. We're like South Pacific Islanders. We have taboos, Bring this plant into your house and you must go away to the big slammer for a while. This is a taboo. My position, which I don't suppose I should say I advocated, because as I understand it, that's one higher level of federal crime. So here is my position, but I don't advocate it, is that, people should be able to do whatever they damn well please. That government is for the convenience of people. And in particular, in the United States, we already have in place a clause which says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are inalienable rights. Inalienable. That means government cannot interfere with these rights. Well, pursuit of happiness, I don't think you have to be a shyster to believe that pursuit of happiness covers experimenting with psychedelic substances. Seems to me perfectly clear. Without an understanding and a familiarity of the psychedelic experience, you should be sued for fraud if you're practicing psychotherapy, because the dynamics of the mind. Isn't that what psychotherapy is about? Well, you know this much unless you have had a variety of psychedelic experiences. That's where the confirmation of all this theory is, and that's where you find out what you're running from. And if you look at the cure statistics on alcoholism with LSD, it's phenomenal before LSD was made illegal. Now, I understand, I don't believe these are chemical cures to drug dependency. That isn't how it works. It works like this. You take LSD, you're an alcoholic or a junkie. You take LSD, all your illusions and defenses are dissolved. You see that you're killing yourself and that you're a pathetic wretch and that you're destroying yourself and the people around you. And then you come down. And out of that experience, you existentially draw, in some cases, the power, the self-will, and the motivation to change your behavior.